Hello my friends, and welcome to this next video in this series where we shall continue our discussion on the document object model. In the last video, we saw that the document object model is a tree-like representation of our HTML web page. So what happens is that whenever we visit a website or a web page on our browser, the browser creates a document object model for that particular web page. And take a typical web page, for example, having headings, paragraphs. Now, the document object model for this particular web page is going to look something like this. The HTML being the root of the particular web page, and then you having the head and the body. The head has a link, a title, and a style, while the body has a heading and two paragraphs. Looking at this tree, we would say that the title, the link, and the style within the head, they are all children of the head tag, while the heading and the two paragraphs within the body are the children of the body tag. And the head and the body, in turn, are the children of the HTML or root element. So that means that every element or node that exists in the DOM tree has a parent, with the exception of the root element, that is the HTML element. So it is important to just bear this at the back of our mind, because when we start working in this video with the DOM, we're going to understand why this relationship, that is the parent-child relationship, is important. So that's briefly what we saw in the last video, and we were able to do some simple manipulation with our web page. But in this video, I want to give us a more structured way of understanding and working with the DOM, so that whenever we think of manipulating or communicating with our web page, we would know what to do exactly, and we would know how to go about it exactly, so there will be no confusion. Now, there are three things we should bear in mind when we want to use a DOM to manipulate or communicate with our web page. The first one is functions or methods. So when we do something like document.getElement by ID. This getElement by ID is a function that exists on the DOM. You can also say it's a method that exists on the DOM. And we use it to grab a particular element that exists on the web page based on an ID. And of course, looking at this function, we know it's a function, right? Because it has parentheses. There are other ones such as document.getElements by class name, document.getElements by tag name, document.querySelector, which we're of course going to use in this video as well. The second thing to bear in mind is something known as property. So when we do something like document.getElement by ID dot style, this style right here is a property. It is not a function, right? Because it has no parentheses. We don't put a parenthesis when we use the style. And this style property is used to set a CSS value on that particular element that we've actually grabbed off the HTML web page. So if we say something like document.getElement by ID dot style dot background color, it means that we want to set a background color on that particular HTML element that we've picked off from the web page using the DOM. And then we can set it to something like blue or red, depending on whatever we want to set it to. The third thing to bear in mind is something known as events. Events are basically actions or things, just about anything that can happen on our HTML web page, such as when we click on a button, when we hover around a button, or when we scroll through a web page. All these things are actions or events or things that happen on the web page. And we can do something based on those events or actions. So for example, we might want to change the background color of a button when we hover around the button or click the button. Some of the events that are popular include onClick. That is, when we click a particular button or any other HTML element for that matter on the web page. It could be a paragraph, it could be a heading, it could be a button, it could just be about anything. So we use the onClick event to know when that particular element has been clicked. Another one is on mouse enter, so to know when we use our mouse to go inside of that element, be it a heading, an image, or anything, or on mouse out or on mouse glyph, that is to know when the mouse has left that particular HTML element. And we can do a whole lot of things based on this event. Now, my friends, enough of the theory. Let us jump right into our VS Code and work with our browser so that we can see how these things can be done, and then we'll gain more confidence working and manipulating our HTML web page using the document object model. On the left here is my VS Code, and on the right is my browser. And instead of the head, we have this style right here that gives this web page a style. And what I'm going to do is to move this code right here within the style tag to a completely new file. So I'm going to copy this one out of the CSS code right here, and then remove the style tag, and then come right here and create a new file. So I'm going to click here to create a new file, and I'm going to call it style.css, and I'm going to paste that same code right here. So I'm going to save. And then I'm also going to save the home.html file. So when I save, you can see that the stylings have disappeared. And that's because we've removed it from here and put it inside of another file right here. So how do we connect this style.css file to our home.html file? Well, I'm going to come here within the head, and then I'm going to give a link tag. This link tag will help us to connect our style.css file to our home.html file. And just like all HTML tags, the link tag takes on different sort of attributes, such as the rel attributes and the href attributes. So this href attribute will give the location of the file that we want to link. So I'm going to come right here and just say something like / then style.css file. And by the way, if you don't know how all these things work, you can check the description below for the link to my HTML and CSS course. It's going to expose you to what HTML and CSS are and how they work together. So now that I've given the location of the style.css file to this href attributes, if I save this file right here, you see that those stylings become alive again. And currently within the body, I just have the h1 and 2 paragraphs and the button. So now let's think, first of all, what is it that we want to do? Now, what I want to do is actually to make this learning is fun paragraph to have a color, a different color. We did that in the last video, but we're getting somewhere with this, okay? So what I can do is go to my scripting.js file right here, and then we're going to capture the learning is fun paragraph. And remember what I said about the things to bear in mind when you're trying to manipulate the content of your HTML page. So what I want to do first of all is to grab this first paragraph, the one that says learning is fun. So how do I grab that? I'm going to use document dot, and this I'm going to use query selector. And if you look carefully, you see that there are two kinds. You have the query selector and query selector all. So query selector all will select more than one element on the web page, and query selector will select just one, the first instance of that element. So since I want to select paragraph, I'm going to give them a parenthesis because this is a function or a method, and then within the parenthesis I'm going to give p because I want to select the paragraph. So but what happens is that there are two paragraphs right here, this first paragraph here and the second paragraph. So since we're using the query selector, it is just going to select only this one, the first one it says. But if it were the query selector all, then it is going to select both this one and this one. Okay, so we can now access them as an array, as contents in an array. Okay, all right, so this is what we have here, and I'm going to store this in a variable. So I'm going to say let p1 to represent first paragraph equals document.querySelector p. And then what do I want to do to this paragraph? Now I can say something like p1 dot, I want to change the style, right? Because changing the background color is style, right? I want to change the star. I'm going to say p1.star.background color. And I'm going to set it to gray and then save. Now, as soon as I save, the background color of this first paragraph changes to gray. But what if I only want the background color of this first paragraph to change to gray only when I click on this button? Because remember, as soon as I save my file, I will have this right here, the first paragraph change to gray. So even when I refresh, you can see that it is gray already. And that's because we're changing it as soon as the page is loading. Okay. But we want to be able to do this, that is change the background color of this first paragraph only when we click the button. So how do we do that? What we can do is to go back to home.html and come to this button. So we want to listen for an event. And remember when I talked about the 3 things to bear in mind, events was one of them. So we're going to come to this button and attach something to it that will let us know or let the browser know when the button is clicked. So how do we do that? We come to the button and say something like on click. Now you can see there's a whole bunch of other events that can happen on this button. And in fact, any other HTML element that exists on this page. So you have on can play, on can play through, on scroll, on select, different kinds of events that can happen. But the one I want to work with is on click. So that means we want to listen for when a button, this particular button, has been clicked on our web page. All right. And this on click is an attribute that can go on any HTML element that exists on the web page, not only button, but we know that button is one of the elements on the web page that can naturally be clicked on. So for this on click, we're going to add a value or give it a value, and that value is going to be a function that we're going to write. So I'm going to call that function change background, and I'm going to put parentheses like this because I'm providing a function to it. Where is this function? We're going to write it inside of our scripting.js file. So first of all, I'm going to save our home.html file and then come right here and remove all of this code and start afresh. So what I want to do is create that function that will run whenever the button is clicked, because that's the code we've written here. Whenever we click on this button, let this function run. Right now, if I click on the button, nothing is happening because we've not created this function. So nothing is running. Going back to our scripting.js file, I can create that function. So I'm going to say function change background. And we're going to make sure that the function right here is the same thing, the same name as the one we've provided right here. All right. So going back to the scripting.js file, now I'm going to write the things that should run when this function is called or fired. So first of all, I want to grab this learning is fun paragraph. So I'm going to say let p1 equals document.querySelector and then p. Now what do I want to do to this paragraph? I want to say p1.star.background color is equals blue and save. So right here, this is what I want to do when this function is run. And you can see that that gray color has disappeared, and that's because we're no longer changing the background color of this first paragraph as soon as we load our code. Instead, it's going to take on the original color that we have here in the star, this color of bisque, background color of bisque, all right? But now we want the background color to change only when the button is clicked. So if we click the button, now you see that it has changed to blue. I actually don't like this blue color. So what I'm going to do instead is to change this to gray. So I'm going to save. And when I save, of course, this is going to disappear because we need to click on the button before any change happens on the web page. So as soon as I click, now you see that the background color of this first paragraph has been changed to gray. When I refresh, everything goes back to normal. And when I click, it changes to gray. So we've seen how this can work. Now, let's try to add some other sort of events or action that can happen on this web page. currently we have on click for this button. So we're listening for a click event on this button. What if we want to listen, or want the browser to listen for when a mouse comes around this button instead of clicking? How do we do that? Well, there is another attribute that we can add, and that is called on mouse enter. You can see it is right here. So you have different ones. You have on mouse down, on mouse enter, on mouse leave, that is when the mouse leaves the button or any other HTML element that you have or you're targeting, on mouse move, on mouse out, and so on and so forth. But the one I'm interested in currently is on mouse enter. So I'm going to say on mouse enter like this, and then I'm going to provide a function that should run when a mouse enters this button, because that's what it means. When a mouse enters, not clicking, but when a mouse just comes around the button. And I'm going to provide a function that should run whenever that event of a mouse coming around the button happens. So I'm going to call it change font size like this. I am yet to create this function, but I'll be creating it inside of my scripting.js file. So I'm going to save this one, and then let me copy this one so that we have exactly the same thing when we're writing the function right here. Now I'm going to define another function, and I'm going to call it change font size like this. So what do I want to do? I want to grab the second paragraph. So what I can do actually is to use the query selector all. So what I'm going to do is let P2 to stand for the second paragraph equals document.querySelector all, and then I'm going to provide this parenthesis and then target the P like this. And since this is query selector all, it's going to select all the paragraph that exists on this web page. So I'm going to use the square bracket notation to select the second one by providing a value of 1. If I had written 0, it will select the first one, but if I write 1, select the second one right here that says I love to learn. So now we have the second paragraph, right? So I want to change the font size of the second paragraph. Now how do we do that? I'm going to say p2.star.font size like this. So we're going to say that equals to 60 pixels like this. So let me save. But remember, this font size of 60 pixels will only be changed for this paragraph when we do what? When we hover around the button. So you can see as soon as I hovered around, the font size of this second paragraph changes. Now let me refresh the page so that everything goes back to normal. And as soon as I just take my mouse close, you can see it quickly changes to this size. So you can see how we've used the DOM again to change or manipulate the content of our HTML page. Now, assuming for the button, we want to add other events or actions that can happen on this web page or on the button specifically, since I'm talking about the button. So how do I do it? Now we have on mouse enter. Initially we had on click, and in fact I can add that on click once again. So I can say on click, and then I have to provide a function right here that should run, right? Initially we had change background, so I'm going to save, and if I hover around, you can see this has already changed. But if I click on this button, you can see that this one has also changed. So you can see it's working. Now that is how we can add as many events as possible that we want to add for this button. Currently we just have on mouse enter, that is for when the mouse hovers around or comes around the button. On click for when we click the button. Okay, we can add as many as we want like that, but this is going to clog up our HTML code. Imagine having about 7 or 8 different events that can happen on this button. It's going to make our code, our HTML code, look very, very ugly, right? So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to actually write everything right here in our VS Code, in our scripting.js file, so that you don't have to provide all this on mouse enter, on click, on mouse out, and so on and so forth. We're just going to do everything right here within our scripting.js file and keep our home.html file very, very clean. In the next video, we're also going to see how the parent-child relationship shared by elements in the DOM can help us to manipulate elements on our web page. So see you in the next video.